This is the site of Sunbury's accidental airport. That line of buckets you can see in the background designates the runway. But in order to get into how this came about, we're going to have to explore and learn more. We're going to gloss over the rich and storied history of early flight and the early U.S. airmail system. The TLDRs, lots of mishaps and follies, plenty of tomfoolery, but somehow it all worked out. We are going to briefly introduce one of the pioneers of airmail, Ernest M. Allison. E.M. Allie Allison was a U.S. Army Air Service pilot and flight instructor. Upon being decommissioned in 1919, he resigned and moved to Philadelphia, PA, where he ran a private flight school. When the Postal Service decided to get into sending mail by plane, Allie was one of the first pilots brought in to do the job. Shortly after the first few airmail flights on the East Coast, transcontinental routes were already being set up and run. In the entire transcontinental route, the stretch between Sunbury and Bellefonte was the most dreaded, and affectionately called Hell's Stretch, because of frequent fog and shifting weather in the mountains. Pilots were regularly forced to make unscheduled stops. Allie was no exception. The following is taken from a letter that Allison wrote to Louis Dilbert, who was the House Representative of Pennsylvania and was also from Sunbury. One day in November or December 1920, I landed on this field because of low clouds and rain. After about 2 hours, the weather improved, and I took off and completed my run to Bellefonte, Cleveland. When I landed in Sunbury, I realized that I was landing on a farmer's field and making deep tracks due to the wet ground. I expected the farmer to show up and give me a going-over for the damage to his field. Soon, I saw him coming toward me, and when he spoke, he appeared to be in a good mood. In fact, he said he was sorry the large stump in the middle of the field had not been removed. Another airmail pilot had landed in the same field some weeks previous and told him his field would make a good landing field if that stump was removed. He had intended to do it, but just had not gotten around to it. Many farmers along our route were not so friendly. I never again had an occasion to land at Sunbury, but I did notice later that the stump had been removed. I hope the gentleman is still living. If so, please thank him for removing that stump. Early airmail was often a combination of air and train travel. Shipments would travel by air during the day and be transferred to a train at night or when the weather was bad. The airport's close proximity to the Sunbury train terminal made it an excellent location for an emergency stop. Because of Allison's unscheduled stop and the report of the previous incident, it was decided that a more permanent emergency stop be set up here on the island. By 1925, navigational lights were installed on Wren's Hill, later moved to Mile Hill. In April of 1926, a caretaker and weather observer was assigned to Sunbury Intermediate Field by the Postal Department. It wasn't just mail that stopped here. On July 29, 1929, Amelia Earhart was flying with her mother from Long Island to Cleveland. Stormy weather forced them to land at Sunbury Airport. While her solo flight across the Atlantic was still a few years away, she was already well known for her feats in aviation. As the previous year, she made history as the first female passenger to cross the Atlantic in a plane, and she already held numerous speed and distance records. So when the weather forced her and her mother to land here, they were given the royal treatment. The story is that they dined here at the City Hotel, now known as the Hotel Edison, but that's a story for another time. They stayed the night here and left the next day when the weather improved. They would both return a few months later. Newspaper accounts report a second similar landing on Saturday, September 16, 1929, as her and her mother were flying from Long Island to Kansas City, they were forced again to land at Sunbury. Some accounts describe a near miss on this landing, with Amelia almost hitting a fence at the end of the field. Another famous flyer landed here, Dale Red Jackson, a well-known barnstormer and record and endurance flyer. I did a short about him. Check it out. Although it enjoyed quite a bit of business in the early 1900s, usage quickly declined. It is still in use today, however, mostly for small planes. Over 100 years of usage. Not bad for an accidental airport.